About 50,000 people are searching how to deadlift this month alone, which might be including you depending on how you found this video. So I decided to make a tutorial that shows you exactly how to execute a trap bar, conventional, and sumo deadlift with great form. In my opinion, this is the easiest one to learn, with conventional deadlifting following this one, and then sumo being the most challenging to learn or the most challenging to execute. To get started, we want to properly align ourselves inside of that trap bar. So you'll see that mine has the open front, where maybe some in your gym or the one that you have doesn't. It's more closed off. That's totally fine. I usually could go by just looking at where the handles are. So I want my handles to be a straight line down from my shoulder. So if I come too far forward, then my hands are going to be reaching slightly behind me instead of right in alignment with my hips. And same thing, if I go too far back, depending on how big your trap bar is, now my hands are slightly in front of my hips. Instead, I want to line my feet up right next to those handles so that when I come down, my hands are right on the outside of my thighs. After that, you want to make sure that your feet are about hip width apart, or maybe you'll be a little bit more comfortable with a little bit wider of a stance, but for most people, hip width is perfect. From there, I'm going to reach down to the bar by pushing my hips back towards the room behind me. So if you need some help with this, literally what I do sometimes is put my hands in these little karate chop forms, and I put them right where my hip would bend, and I help myself push my hips back so I could feel that big stretch in my hamstrings and in my glutes. From there, I'm going to reach my hands down again right on the outside of my legs. So my elbows are basically on the outside of my knees, and I'm going to grab my bars here right in the middle of the bar. Because if you grab too far forward, you're probably going to end up doing your deadlift with your bar tilted forward or slightly back, depending on where your hand placement is. So right in the middle usually can help us guarantee that our bar stays nice and straight or flat like this the whole time, instead of bending and feeling like we're going to lose our grip. Once we get our hand placement just right and the bar is nice and flat, I then like to start, before I lift though, we are not lifting yet, with my upper back slightly rounded up towards the ceiling, because then it really helps me to then pull my shoulders back and away from my ears. So I'm just pulling my shoulder blades down. The shoulders are nowhere near my ears now. And then I'm thinking about rotating and squeezing my arms in. It's almost like you have a roll of paper towel or a newspaper that you're trying to hold in the back part of your armpit, which you can see that I'm kind of symbolizing with this rag. So if I'm squeezing the back part of my armpit, then this rag shouldn't go anywhere as I do my deadlift, and that's what we want to see during this movement. So it's called packing the shoulder, and we want to keep that position throughout the duration of this whole movement. So once I get my upper body into the proper position, I'm then going to just drop my hips down a tiny bit. And what that's going to feel like is like I'm taking all the slack out of the bar. So my arms are nice and straight. It feels like I could lift the bar off the ground without actually doing it at this point. So I have a lot of tension throughout my whole body. The shoulders are down and packed, and my armpit is nice and squeezed in the back. My hips are just a little bit lower to the ground, and I am ready to take off the floor. From there, we're going to take in a really big inhale, pull the air into your belly. I'm going to push down through the floor with my feet. Exhale and lift straight up. Notice that my shoulders are staying down and back the whole time, and that my arms are staying nice and long. At the top, I don't want to shrug or bend. I'm just keeping everything in that stable position, and basically the way that I started. Now, if you're having trouble at the bottom, not keeping your lower back from rounding under like this, it might be because you have really long legs, and this is just too low for you to go to get into proper position. So I'm going to show you guys what you could do to make this position a little bit better feeling and more optimal. So if I have a really tall client or someone that just has abnormally long legs and maybe a short torso, I like to elevate the bar by putting pads or weight plates underneath and just getting them in a better position. So all I'm going to do is lift this up. Depending on how long your legs are or how tall you are, you might need even a higher pad or more weights. But this usually sets people up for a lot more success and takes the weight and the pressure off of someone's lower back. So for someone who was starting rounded under in the lower back in this position because their legs are so long and the only way to get all the way to the floor is by rounding under, now when we elevate it, it helps them get that little anterior pelvic tilt going on in the hips, because we actually want to start with this back nice and flat. We don't want this to be rounded under or that lower back to be taking on a lot of the load in your deadlift. So if you're having problems with that, just experiment with adding a little bit of height, and that should get you into this position and make for a lot more of an optimal form and comfortable deadlift. Okay, so moving on to the conventional deadlift, which I usually teach my clients after we have mastered the trap bar deadlift. And if you watch the first trap bar tutorial and you're moving on to this one now, you're gonna see why, because there are so many similarities. The basics really stay the same, except now we're gonna be changing the hand placement. And with this one, you're probably gonna feel a little bit more stretch in the hamstrings and in the glutes. So unlike the trap bar deadlift where we have our hands at our sides, instead now we're gonna have our hands in front, but a lot of it's gonna be the same. We're gonna line our feet up right underneath the bar. So you want the top of the bar over your shoelace and where the shoelace ties. And our feet are still gonna be hip width apart. From there, I like to take my hands and just glide them down to the bar right on the outside of my thighs. And that's usually how I find where I want my hands to be placed. There's a few different ways that you could place your hands. My favorite being the alternate or switch grip, where you have one hand on top and one hand in this underhand position. This is my favorite because it allows me to use a lot more weight and it's not as taxing on my grip. However, if you have good grip strength, you can do both of your hands in that overhand position, which is regarded by some to be the safest position. And if you want to continue to use that overhand position, but as you bump up the weight, your grip is becoming the limiting factor with your deadlift and how much you could actually lift, all you could do is buy some lifting straps and start to utilize those with this deadlift. So if you're going to use that switch position where one hand is overhand and one hand is underhand, I do recommend switching the position of the hands from time to time because it definitely can create imbalances in the upper body. And I have actually experienced that firsthand. And now I just basically am stuck in this position and it is super hard for me to now switch the grip. So if you're going to start with that, start doing it right away and switching up which hand is on top or underhand. Also, if you're gonna use lifting straps, that's completely fine. Our grip can only hold so much and that's pretty normal for most people, but make sure that you maybe do 1 or 2 sets without the lifting straps so that you could still work your grip strength and improve it. So once we get our feet in that hip width position or inside of where the knurling is, so in this smooth part is a good guide for most people, we're then gonna drag the hands along the outside of the thighs. And usually that brings you to right about where the knurling or rough part of the bar starts. And I'm just gonna do my preferred grip, which is that alternate or switch grip. From here, I'm gonna pull the shoulder blades down so the shoulders come away from the ears. I'm gonna lock in by thinking about squeezing that newspaper in the back of my armpit. And then I'm gonna pull my chest up, slightly lowering the hips. So now the elbows are on the outside of my knees. From there, I'm gonna take that big inhale into my belly, push down through the ground with my feet, and then exhale as I lift up. Same thing, big inhale at the top, start to push those hips back, bend the knees to get closer to the ground, but I'm still using most of my hip hinge here, and there's only a soft bend in the knees, and then you're just gonna repeat the process. All right, moving on to that final deadlift, we have our Sumo Deadlift. This is gonna be a little bit better for people who maybe have longer legs and a shorter torso or are just taller in general, because you're gonna be spread out a little bit further and it's gonna allow you to get your body closer to the ground without putting a lot of stress on your back, like the conventional deadlift might do if you have those longer legs. However, because it is hard on the groin and the hips, if you have any immobilities or injuries in this area, this could be the harder one for you. While that conventional deadlift will work more of your back and your glutes and the hamstrings, this one is gonna work a little bit more of the front of the body and the hips. So we're gonna get a little bit more quad from this because there's going to be a deeper bend in the knees. You're also greatly gonna be working the inside and outside portion of the thighs in comparison to the conventional deadlift. I recommend playing around with all 3 of these different deadlifts because you never know what's gonna work for you and what feels the best. So you might as well take a shot at each of them and figure out where you're at in this moment, what works best for you. And again, that can change in the future. I've gone through phases where I love sumo deadlifting and then I absolutely hate it and I go back to conventional. All right, so let's get into the form on this. So on my bar, I have 2 little smooth notches inside of the rough knurling on each end. That's pretty much a good place for a lot of people, though some people don't like to go as wide and much rather be in this like semi-sumo stance. So you can kind of play around again and find out which one works best for you. But to begin with, I do recommend trying to come out to maybe that first smooth part in your bar, which most bars do have. So I'm gonna bring my shin all the way to that first smooth part in my bar. And I'm gonna slightly turn out the foot here. And I'm gonna do that on both sides. So we want the foot and the shin to basically be touching the bar, or the shoelace to be right underneath the bar with that 45-degree outward turn of the feet. From there, I want my arms to come straight down. So I'm gonna roll those shoulders back, and I'm just gonna come straight below my shoulders with my hands. A lot of times that place is either like my ring finger or my middle finger, right where the rough and smooth part are meeting on my bar. From there, we're gonna do the same exact thing. We're gonna roll those shoulder blades down, squeeze the back of the armpit, and I'm going to pull my chest up so that the knee comes over the heel in this position. That's basically what we're looking for here. If you're a little bit closer together with your feet, you might even have the knees come out a little bit further over the heel. Okay, so it just kind of depends on what your stance is. But for these wider stance ones, as I pull my shoulders down and my chest up, my hips sit lower and I'm more upright than in the conventional deadlift. And I'm thinking about driving my knees out over my heels so that the knee is almost right on top. From there, a cue I really like to use with this one to get the bar off of the ground, because we already know to pull, is to think about splitting the floor in half with your feet. So you know when you have a piece of paper and you bunch it up so it becomes like a little like mountain, and then you pull it really tight and it feels very taut? It's kind of what you're doing with your feet. So I'm thinking about spreading the floor with my feet, and that makes my knees drive out even better. And then I'm gonna reach down from there, spread the floor, push the feet down through the ground, and then stand straight up, bringing that bar right around the bottom of your groin or pelvis area. Big inhale, push those hips back, start to bend the knees, come back down. Again, big inhale, pull the air into the belly, pull the shoulder blades down, squeeze the back of the armpit, spread the floor with the feet, and then you're coming right back up with it. I recently began taking new online clients again because of the new year. So if you're interested in mastering lifts like these deadlifts, building muscle and getting stronger, you guys can apply to be an online client of mine down below. You'll also find a link to some free goodies in the description, so just check it out anyways if you like free stuff. I hope that this video gave you some more confidence when it comes to this particular lift, because it could be a very controversial one, and I think that's why so many people search how to deadlift each month. But if you work on perfecting the form and not going too heavy before you're ready, it really isn't dangerous, and it's so helpful for growing a really strong posterior chain or backside. It's also just really fun. It's always been one of my favorite lifts. So let me know in the comments if you learned anything new from this video, and I hope to see you guys on the next video. Take care.